My name is Roger Porter, Director of the Center for Business and Government here at the Kennedy School, and on behalf of the Institute of Politics and the Center for Business and Government, we are delighted to welcome you to this forum event this evening on the United States and Korea, an assessment of the bilateral relationship. Few relationships have proven more durable or important for the United States in the past half century than that with the Republic of Korea. Since the 1953 armistice that ended the fighting with North Korea, the people of the Republic of Korea, now numbering about 45 million, have lifted themselves up by their economic bootstraps. As recently as the early 1960s, Korea's annual gross domestic product per capita was less than $100. Last year, that key measure of national economic wealth exceeded $10,000 per person. Many are surprised to learn that Korea is America's 6th largest trading partner, our 5th largest export market, the 3rd largest market for our agricultural products, and the 11th largest economy in the world. While Korea's extraordinary growth remains a hallmark of its economy, a rising trade deficit and somewhat slower growth in the last year, coupled with labor unrest, has heightened anxieties and brought into focus the importance of this relationship between the United States and the Republic of Korea. So we are very fortunate tonight to have with us two individuals who know this relationship well. Following his graduation in law from Seoul National University, Ambassador Kun Woo Park joined the Korean Ministry of Foreign Affairs. For more than 3 decades, he has filled a large number of assignments in a variety of places. His career has taken him from Seoul to New York and the Korean mission to the United Nations, to the Korean Embassy in Washington, to the consulate in Atlanta, back to Washington, and on to Nigeria before returning to Seoul. In the last 12 years, he has served as Korea's ambassador to Colombia, as chief of protocol for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, as Korea's ambassador to Canada, as vice minister of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and now as Korea's ambassador to the United States. He is a distinguished diplomat. Few have played as prominent a role in shaping the relationship between our two countries than Ambassador Park. We are very fortunate to have him with us this evening. We will hear from him first. I will then introduce Ambassador Laney, and we will then open the evening for your questions. Ambassador Park.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Porter, for your kind introduction. My greatest regret not to be included in my resume is that I tried hard once to study at CFIA, but in vain for twice. So if I went CFIA, I would be better ambassador, but I'll do my best without that, my experiences. But I'm sure that many of you spent much of your time for plowing and digging yesterday and today. But it's worthwhile to listen to Korean developments, and which will be followed by that exciting game from 10:30 that which will give us relaxation from Los Angeles. That's a Red Sox game this evening. I will join you to giving my hands to them. It is indeed my great honor and privilege to be invited to this prestigious forum. And thank you very much once again for your kind invitation. I'm particularly happy that I'm here with the most distinguished ambassador from your great country to my country, Ambassador Laney. He has been great ambassador representing the United States of America. Since he left, many of us are missing him in Korea. I'd like to spend just a few minutes in this evening discussing the security situation on the Korean Peninsula and the vital role performed by the Korean-US alliance partnership in maintaining peace and stability. That partnership is no less important today than it was half a century ago. After nearly 50 years, the division of the Korean Peninsula remains not only the single most volatile situation in East Asia, but also one of the most tense confrontations anywhere. The recent fragile situation in North Korea, stemming from political instability and economic hardship, and demonstrated by a food and energy shortage, makes it a more urgent task to achieve genuine accommodation and reconciliation between the two Koreas. President Kim has called Korea's peaceful unification the greatest task facing our people. Fundamentally, my government believes that eventual unification should come about through a sequence of confidence-building measures entailing mutual respect and cooperation on matters of common concern at the social level, like family reunions, transportation, and communications. Overall, once North Korea ceases its course of confrontation path, which will lead to peace and reconciliation on the Korean Peninsula, can be opened. Through close consultation with the United States and other major allies and the United Nations, Seoul has forged a consensus on a responsible multilateral approach toward North Korea. At last year's summit meeting in Korea between Presidents Kim and Clinton, our two nations joined in proposing four-party talks between representatives of two Koreas, China, and the United States to initiate a process aimed at achieving a permanent peace agreement on the Korean Peninsula. This proposal is a positive and important step for easing tension and realizing a lasting peace. As you may be aware, on March 5th, South Korea and the United States jointly provided a briefing for the North Koreans in New York on the four-party talks proposal. The briefing focused both on the background of the proposal and the future course of action to be taken. During the session in New York, we stressed that the two Koreas must play the main roles in establishing a lasting peace mechanism on the peninsula, and that tension reducing and confidence building between the South and North are essential in expediting this process. At the same time, we disclosed our intention to discuss inter-Korean economic cooperation in the four-party talks as a way of reducing tensions and fostering confidence-building measures. The United States representatives hoped that the briefing would serve as a milestone to bring about genuine and lasting peace on the Korean Peninsula. They also hoped that the peace process could begin as soon as possible based upon the South-North Basic Agreement of 1992 and the Geneva Agreement agreed framework of 1994. At the same time, U.S. emphasized that the peace arrangement is not a matter to be discussed separately between the U.S. and North Korea, but should be discussed between South and North Korea, the parties directly concerned. Furthermore, U.S. representatives stated that the aim of the four-party talk is, in fact, to provide a framework for inter-Korean discussions, while the United States will take an active role in the talks to help ensure successful outcome. Both we and the United States explained also that Chinese participation in the talks will be essential, since China is a signatory of the Armistice Agreement and has much interest in reducing tension and establishing peace on the peninsula. The Republic of Korea now believes the four-party meeting is the most realistic and feasible way to establish a peace mechanism on the Korean Peninsula. So we earnestly hope that North Korea will accept the proposal as soon as possible. Let me turn just for a moment to the issue of food aid for the North Korea. My government recognizes that the North Korean people are suffering from a shortage, and therefore we are participating in international organization efforts on a humanitarian basis. We will continue to participate in international humanitarian food aid efforts. Here, I would like to remind you that North Korea still maintains the world's fourth largest army with biochemical weapons and long-range ballistic missiles. They have positioned their troops and heavy weaponry near the DMZ, which is just 30 miles from Seoul. This remains a major threat to the South. It is very important for North Korea to participate in the four-party talks for the sake of tension reduction and confidence building. In that setting, both food aid and broad economic cooperation between the two Koreas can be discussed together with a peace treaty for the peninsula. Obviously, any improvement in the South-North dialogue, there cannot be any true peace and stability on the Korean Peninsula. In summary, we have to watch the evolving North Korean situation very closely with regard to its current difficult internal situation, politically and economically. As soon as the North comes to the four-party meeting, we will try and help it deal with its failing economy, thus preparing a basis for confidence building between the South and the North. Truly, the Korean people yearns for a spring thaw which will bring peace to the Korean Peninsula, the last outpost of the Cold War era before the next millennium. Before closing, I want to let you know that Korea's trade and economic cooperation with the United States has steadily expanded over the years to our mutual benefit and satisfaction. American products and services are very popular with Korea's consumers, a fact borne out by trade statistics. According to the U.S. Commerce Department, Korea now is the fifth largest export market for a country. High-tech products occupy another major niche in our market. In fact, with its overall exports growing at a rate of 10% last year, the United States once again became the #1 exporter to Korea in 1996, surpassing Japan. At the same time, total two-way trade has increased by 47% in 5 years, reaching $55 billion in 1996, compared to $38 billion in 1991, according to Korea's statistics. My country is now your 7th largest trading partner. Occasional trade frictions are natural given the magnitude and the complexity of the bilateral relationship. Nevertheless, trade issues between us have consistently been resolved through dialogue and earnest efforts on both sides. As for investment, the lifeblood of any nation's economic development, there has been a steady and consistent trend of cooperation between our two countries. The U.S. has been the biggest source of foreign investment in Korea, surpassing Japan in 1995 and reaching $876 million in 1996. Meanwhile, Korea's investment in the United States has also grown rapidly during the decade, recording $1.5 billion in 1996. Also, there is great potential for further expansion of Korea-U.S. trade and investment in years to come. Moreover, Korean and U.S. industries are often complementary, particularly in such a high-tech field as aerospace and the environment. Fortunately, Korea's economy is resilient and growing, and the country's prosperity surely benefits U.S. economic interest as well. No doubt, Korea will remain a major market for the United States. Even the international avenues for our bilateral cooperation are expanding through our joint efforts in such multilateral fora as the OECD, the WTO, APEC, and ECOSOC of the United Nations. Without a doubt, South Korea has become an important player in the international economy. It is ready to cooperate with the United States in dealing with such issues as environmental protection and strengthening of the global and regional free trading system. All of us will benefit from closer bilateral cooperation in these and in other dimensions. Ladies and gentlemen, in conclusion, I would like to add that after nearly a half century of cooperation, Korea and the United States have achieved a comprehensive and durable partnership in nearly every field of endeavor. Together, we share a wealth of common experiences, interests, and values. Consequently, our national efforts can easily be pooled to accomplish a great many common objectives regionally and globally in the coming years. With permanent stability and peace on the Korean Peninsula, there is very little that could not be accomplished. There is no doubt that Korea and the United States will remain close partners and friends for the generations to come. As ambassador to the United States, I'm very happy to convey the sentiment of my country, my government, and my people that we will be the most loyal partners years to come, even entering new millennium. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Park. James T. Laney, a son of the South, ventured north for his undergraduate education at Yale University. And while at Yale, he left to do a stint in the Army in counterintelligence and was sent to Korea. And there began a lifelong love of his with Korea and the Korean people. He returned to Yale, finished his degree in economics, did a degree in divinity, and a PhD as a Macintosh Fellow. And then he bundled up his young family and went off to Korea with the Methodist Church to teach for 5 years at a Korean university. He returned to the United States, teaching at Vanderbilt, and most notably at Emory University, where he served for 16 years as its president. As president of Emory University, it emerged as one of our nation's foremost teaching and research universities. And when he resigned, Emory's endowment had grown to almost $2 billion, placing it 6th among U.S. universities. Well, he resigned because President Clinton appointed him to serve as the United States ambassador to Korea in 1993, and he served in a very distinguished capacity there for 4 years, resigning this last February. He is a delightful person. We are fortunate to have him with us. He knows a great deal, not only about this country, but about another country he loves, Korea, and it's a thrill for us to have as our next speaker, Ambassador James T. Laney.
Thank you very much, Roger. I appreciate the kindness of your introduction and the privilege of being here at this distinguished forum. I want to acknowledge our distinguished guests from Kazakhstan, the cabinet, who are here being translated. and to say how pleased I am that I can speak before you. I met your president and many of you at the Blue House in Seoul a couple of years ago when there was an official state visit. I also want, if I may, take this privilege to acknowledge among the guests an old friend. Ruth Deutsch is here, whose husband, Carl Deutsch, was the dean of scholars and academics in international relations for many years here at Harvard, a man of towering intellect and of great scholarly attainment and of reputation. And he was a friend of mine, as she is, and I'm delighted to see her as well, and all of you. In the few minutes I have, I'm really doing a retrospective. I have left, as was said, my post formally, and am now in private life. There are two things that I take with me. One is the seriousness of the situation in North Korea. And the other is the remarkable achievement of South Korea. These are almost total opposites. If this is the last outpost of the Cold War, it's clear how that has turned out not only in the rest of the world, but on the Korean Peninsula. In the North, we have a regime that is a dying ember. Communism failed manifestly. A country that now cannot feed its people, indeed, within the next few months may have a great number on the brink of starvation. A country whose leadership has not been able to consolidate itself, even with all of the tentacles and apparatus of power of a totalitarian regime. And a country whose economy is in shambles. All of this is eloquent testimony to the failure of communism. And across the DMZ, the demilitarized zone to the south, you have a dramatic, astonishing example of how a free market economy and now a flourishing democracy has succeeded. Despite some hiccups, some problems of growth, some serious slowdown in the economy, the fact is that for 30 years the South Korean economy has grown at a compound rate of over 8% net of inflation, which is unexcelled by any other country in the world in this century, having risen literally from the ashes of destruction after the Korean War to become, as has been pointed out, the 11th largest, most dynamic economy in the world. Now, comparisons are in order. It is more important to us in trade than Italy or France. South Korea. I'm trying to make this point. South Korea has a $55 billion mutual trade with us, and we're in surplus. There are not many countries where the U.S. has a surplus of trade. We hear an awful lot about trade with China from the United States, about the importance of that great economy, and I would not in any sense want to denigrate it. The fact is that we sell twice as much to South Korea as we do to China, and the rate of increase is growing faster than it is to China. Now that's to put it in perspective. That's to the south. That kind of strength, that kind of success stands in stark contrast to the north, and much of the problem we have on the Korean Peninsula is precisely the contrast between the abject failure of the north and the remarkable success of the south. The fact that the north won't do business with the south, won't even sit down at the table with them for the most part on any serious range of issues, is because of the humiliation involved. They have set themselves forth as being the legitimate government on the peninsula and as being the great success, and of course now that is demonstrably false. So in one sense, the problems, the troubles of the North are good news because it indicates how the South has won the contest. And in that sense, it's over. But the seriousness of the situation lies in the fact that that weakness and that decline is destabilizing what has been for 40 years a very stable balance of power on the peninsula. It is that very weakness that causes all of us to be concerned about what's going to happen in the end game of North Korea. You hear a lot about collapse, but what kind of collapse? Will it be an economic collapse that will lead to chaos and millions of refugees flowing across the Yalu into China and south into Seoul? And what will that mean for the cost, the burden for South Korea in dealing with the North? And that's the better case scenario. The worst case scenario is that as the government becomes unable to control the situation and it spirals downward, that a disaffected and unhappy military regime will seek control and find, out of its desperation, having nothing to lose, a decision possibly to launch an attack that could be devastating to all that the South has accomplished. Now, the United States and the ROK have enormous equities in what has happened in the South. It stands, as we've all said, as a kind of benchmark of recovery, daring do, and strength and discipline. We don't need another Korean War on the peninsula. How do we avoid it? This is the great question. As Ambassador Pak, my good friend and marvelous ambassador, interpreter of both countries to each other in Washington, has already pointed out, last April, Presidents Kim and Clinton, trying to break out of what seemed to be a stalemate, made an invitation to the North without any precondition that if the North would come to the table in any country, any place in the world, and meet with the United States, the ROK, and China, that the agenda would be wide open, including the need for food and economic assistance that is so clear for the North. While there has been a briefing by the United States and South Korea of the North about the four-party talks, the fact is that we remain, for all intents and purposes, stalemated. There are a lot of people in the South, for reasons that are understandable, who would like to see the North just collapse, not only to get it over with out of impatience, but because of a sense of, well, they have it coming to them. I can understand that, having lived there for the last 3.5 years. The frustration, exasperation, and anger for the provocations of the North, the incursion of the submarine last fall, their disdain and contempt for the South, the vilification of the president, all of these things are really infuriating over time. And it's a very natural reaction to say, well, let's let them collapse, get them out of the way. That's what they deserve. If one would take a poll among all the countries of the United Nations, I'm sure that North Korea would be at the bottom of any of the list of nations in terms of any sympathy or concern on the part of the world. Their isolation, their enigmatic posture, their paranoia, their resistance to having any kind of outside influence or commerce or intercourse makes it very difficult not only to deal with them, but to even want to deal with them. That's understandable. But the fact is, if we look at it rationally and coolly, it is very important for the United States and for South Korea to handle North Korea in a way, not merely that there be a soft landing, but that this worst case scenario of any kind simply does not come to pass. If we're stalemated in the four-party talks, what is the option? I think we must enlist China to be more aggressive, to take more initiative in that circle of friends and participants. We're going to have to ask them to meet with us to find a new way, an opening that would make it possible for us to deal with the North in a way that would, in a sense, reassure them that they will neither be absorbed nor annihilated if they sit down and deal with us. We're going to have to make that kind of assurance or guarantee in order to get them to sit down, because any kind of contact with the South otherwise spells for them doom. Whether at that point it'll work is an open question. But we know this, that by the end of this month, and certainly by the middle of May, their food is largely going to run out. And the internal regime of North Korea is going to face strains that it's never had before. With all of that firepower that has Seoul within the range of its mortars and artillery, it is absolutely essential that in the next few weeks we have some kind of communication at the higher levels to help explain not only our intent, but also to help the North understand the reality of the world in which they live and face. I'm convinced that that's a possibility. I'm not convinced that it'll happen. But dealing with a group of informed and thoughtful people who have some real influence in the way in which public opinion and government works, I would hope that we could enlist you to raise on the radar screen the importance of the Korean Peninsula. When we think of its importance to the United States economically and the danger, the prospects militarily, the fact that we have almost 40,000 troops there, this means this situation should have one of the top priorities of our government. I would hope that it would be seen as such. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Laney. We now come to our question and answer portion of the program, and I would simply invite you to observe three things. First of all, please come to one of the two mics that are here on the floor. Even though you may have a loud voice, our television and radio audiences will only pick you up if you come to a mic. Secondly, please identify yourself, where you're from, and thirdly, and most importantly, please ask a question rather than make an extended statement, so that we can hear the benefit of the responses by our ambassadors. We'll start with
My name is Sam Passo from the Center of Business and Government. This is a question for Ambassador Laney. This weekend, a congressional delegation returned from North Korea, and Senator Pete Domenici reported that he's been told that there is a now tremendous rift between the civilian and the military parts of the government, and the civilian representation has appealed that the United States give the $1.6 billion in food and economic aid now without any preconditions to coming to the talk to offset the growing power of the military. Do you feel the United States should take the initiative and do this?
I think the United States should respond in concert with our friend and ally, the Republic of Korea. I think that as I read the political landscape, there's no disposition in Congress to appropriate any significant funds at this point for that magnitude of aid for the North. We've already, as you know, contributed $10 million to the World Food Program's appeal, and the ROK contributed a substantial amount as well on a humanitarian basis. I know about the report, the concern that was expressed to that delegation about the muscling in of the military. I might add parenthetically that this recent defector, Huang, who defected in Beijing and is now in the Philippines, a high-level North Korean official, while I'm not privy to what he has said since he's come out, did communicate to a person from South Korea over a year ago in a secret meeting in a third country, a two-day conversation of his great concern of the growing influence and hostility of the military, which is only to reiterate the point that I made earlier, that I think this is a very, very sensitive, fragile situation. And it may well be that if substantial food aid doesn't come within the next few months, that we could see some sort of move like that. But politically speaking, I don't see it happening in the United States, and it's very hard to see that happening in South Korea unless the North is willing to sit down at the table in these four-party talks and address a range of issues, which includes tension reduction. I think that the United States and South Korea both would like to see aid go to the North, including economic aid, but they would also like to see some sort of reciprocal participation, namely reduction in the military tension along the DMZ.
Thank you.
Ambassador Park, do you?
Well, before the senators visited North Korea, I was in Seoul, and we had some discussions. And I'm sure that it served for the basis of their discussion in Pyongyang. But as Ambassador Laney rightly pointed out, we know that they are in difficulties, particularly in food shortage. While we are rendering assistance, particularly in the field of humanitarian basis, we have said over and over that we are ready to provide the huge amount of food if simply they come to the table and discuss for the lasting peace mechanism on the Korean Peninsula. And also generous economic cooperation by the private sectors will be provided. They are ready to do so. So we really hope, most sincerely hope, that North Korea accept our most genuine offer this time, so as to we could enjoy our peace on the peninsula.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Yes, my name is Ruby from the Korean Studies program at the graduate school. I have questions I'd like to hear from the viewpoint from both ambassadors. This is an optimistic question. Once after Korea has unified, I think there will be a pressure from, particularly from China and Koreans, for U.S. military to leave, and probably even domestically there will be strong pressure to bring the troops back home. So I was just curious what your viewpoints on that question in regard to should we keep them there for keeping the stability in the East Asian region.
And then I'll speak.
Yes. Well, as you said, we most sincerely hope that the unification come as soon as possible. And we discuss this very important subject later. But I can tell you now that the United States troops stationing in Korea, South Korea, is not only for the deterrence for the North Korean attack provocations, but also it serves tremendously that for the stabilizing factor for our Northeast Asian region as a whole. So from our South Korean points of view, and of course after unification, the whole Korean point of view will be that United States send troops there as long as we need the United States' role of a stabilizing factor. And also that in view of that our neighborhoods rapid growing factor being involved. So I would like to advocate that the continued stationing of United States troops beyond the reunification is very, very important one for us.
The dean of this school, Joe Nye, before he left government, proposed a policy for the continuation of American forces in Asia and around the world, for that matter. And that included the presence of American troops in Korea after unification, with the idea that those troops would not be there, of course, to defend one side or the other, but rather to stabilize all of East Asia, and most importantly, to obviate the possibility or the attractiveness of an arms race between, say, Japan or China or Russia, possibly. And I think that that holds some attraction at this point. How things will develop in the future is another matter. One of the most important aspects of the troops' presence, however, is whether or not they are received hospitably. I think it's very important for us to understand that to have our troops stationed on foreign soil carries with it certain built-in tensions, even when they're friendly and our allies and all of that. And it's very much incumbent upon the United States to help educate its own forces so that they are good citizens abroad and not merely members of the armed services. We've had in the past few years incidents of GI crimes or misbehavior, which have been very difficult in arousing public opinion in South Korea over the presence of American forces. Another issue that we've had to deal with was the command of the forces, and we transferred civilian command from the United States to the ROK, the South Korea, and that was an important step. So there are ways of our being in a country that are less intrusive and irritating, and I think it's incumbent on us, if we're going to be there, to do all we can to make our presence attractive and palatable and understandable from a policy position. But it's also important for us to help educate the other countries as to the importance strategically of our being there, and it is for their benefit.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
My name is Kwang Suk Ko from CEC in Boston. From what I hear from Ambassador Park and Lenny, apparently North Koreans are starving, right? And South Koreans are saying, if you come to the discussion table, we'll give you food. Is that correct? Why don't we change? Why we cannot change? You know, we'll give you, come to the table. Would you, Ambassador Park, could you explain? You know, according to Dr. Lenny, next 2 months is very serious. Then we can change our attitude that we will give you and we will feed you, so come to the table.
Well, thank you for your concern. But as I said, that we are now providing our humanitarian basis some amount of food to North Korea. But I would like to remind you that in 1995, we have provided North Korea without any condition that 150,000 tons of rice. And upon receiving the gracious offer from the South Korean people to the North, they hoisted the North Korean flag, the very ship that delivered the rice. And later, some other ships, that simply because of one crew member that took a picture for him about 10 years, more than 10 years, was taking picture using camera was his own personal hobby. Simply because of that, all the crew members were detained for 2 weeks. So what a nasty thanking note to the South Koreans that after the delivering revise to the North Koreans. So we are not making any condition, but it's awfully nice for North Korea to accept our genuine offer that please come to the table and we discuss our lasting peace mechanism on the Korean Peninsula. That is the best way we could offer.
I see. You know, I'm not going to argue, but if that's the case.
Okay, thank you very much. Ms. Lang.
My name is Jeannie Lang, and I'm an undergraduate from the college. And I was interested, Ambassador Laney, you were speaking about the need to make very clear to the international community that American forces are in the area as a conciliatory force rather than there in any way to aggravate tensions. And I was wondering what you see as the attitude currently of the North Koreans towards American troops stationed there, towards the idea of it, and what measures you think the American military should take to make perfectly clear to the North Koreans that the presence is necessary and that the presence is beneficial. And do you think there are things that the American military might do that could possibly aggravate tensions?
I can't really say what the attitude of the North Koreans is toward the American presence in Korea, although our contacts at the demilitarized zone, where there's a joint security area where the North meets with the South and with the United States occasionally to discuss border violations, our contacts have been civil and I think without rancor. At the same time, I think probably the North sees the presence of American troops as a part of the stabilizing posture of the whole peninsula. Actually part of the legacy of the Cold War is that standoff along the DMZ, but that standoff itself has been assured and has been guaranteed now over 40 years by our alliance with the Republic of Korea and our presence there, our physical presence. We have had always on the Korean Peninsula since 1950 at least 40,000, 35 to 40,000 troops. So that's a significant presence. Mm-hmm. So I think that's all I would say with regard to that. The other issue is one of communication. How do we get the message to North Korea? We have these working level talks in New York and so forth. We've invited them to come to the four-party, but they haven't yet decided to come. I think this is the great question. You know, during the height of the Cold War with USSR, we had embassies in Moscow and Washington, which served some purpose, and we had summit meetings. And at least there was some discussion, and of course there was other kinds of communication and travel. None of that now obtains to any degree of significance with the North. That isolation is very deleterious to working out our problems, because we're not at all sure, given the way in which news comes to the top, that it isn't sweetened at every step. That is, that the people making the decisions don't really get a clear picture either of their own situation or of the world outside. No one wants to tell the emperor he has no clothes. And I think this problem is the most critical problem we face right now.
So you think that despite the isolation, the continuity of our being there has allayed any concerns that we might be an intrusion on the part of the North?
Well, I think that it certainly raises the possibility of misunderstanding and accident. Mm-hmm. And that's always a matter of concern. I want to remind you that in 1994, at the height of the nuclear standoff with North Korea, that former President Jimmy Carter went to Pyongyang and helped get a freeze, which was later permanently negotiated in Geneva. The main thing he did was communicate. He brought word in to the old man, who was still alive at that time, as to what the situation was outside and how dangerous it was. And I think over a period of a very arduous 4 days, grueling period of time, talking, breaking through, he got the old man to understand that this wasn't necessary and something could be done about it. He didn't take any goodies, and he didn't leave anything, and he didn't concede anything. He did communicate. My concern right now is we don't have that level of communication. I'm not talking about Carter going up there again, or anything, but we need some kind of communication. And I think it's asinine in this world that we can't seem to get, just talk. Not a concession or appeasement and all those bad things, just talk. Where are we?
Thank
I'm
you.
sorry, I do feel strongly about this.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
My name is Sung Hun Choi. I'm a Kennedy School student. In accordance with the North Korea and U.S. Nuclear agreement in Geneva, there was a international consortium created called Korean Peninsula Energy Development Organization. One of the major purpose of that project was to build two civilian nuclear power plants in North Korea. I wonder what prospect and ramification of that project has in terms of nuclear issue in general, and as part of the reunification process of Korean Peninsula.
Well, the KETO project program is proceeding fairly smoothly now. At this moment, the KETO delegation, of course, is composed by the Koreans and Americans and the Japanese, most of them South Koreans, now in North Korea, or Sinpo area for the groundwork construction there. I'm very happy to share with you that sometime this year there will be a big event for groundbreaking ceremony as well as some visible work will be shown to the North Koreans. On the other hand, as agreed upon in agreed framework in Geneva 1904, that the crude oil has been provided by the United States government to North Korea, and it has been essential source for North Korean energies. On the other hand, North Koreans are continuing the freezing activity of nuclear weapons over there, particularly in dealing with the spent fuel subject as well. So I can tell you that though North Koreans are suffering from such difficulties, the agreed framework is concerned, except the South and North dialogue they have promised in the agreement. I think it's fairly moving smoothly.
Mr. Laney, could you give us some of your thought about this issue from the United States perspective?
I think the United States is very pleased with the progress of the Geneva Framework Agreement. The fact that the nuclear program was frozen and that it continues to be frozen and it's monitored by United States technicians who are over there now all bodes well. There's one side of it, not only the lack of dialogue between North and South, which was a part of the agreement, which has not been implemented. The other is that we agreed, the United States agreed, that we would lift the economic sanctions that are in place on North Korea. And while we lifted some, we haven't lifted all. And I think this is a source of real frustration and anger on the part of some people in the North. They feel like that we have not lived up to all of our side of the bargain. I think that there's a willingness to do this in time, but the North Koreans say, well, how much time is it going to take? And the fact is, if we lifted all the sanctions, it wouldn't really materially affect North Korea's situation. but psychologically, it is a stumbling block right now.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Grace Lee. I'm an undergraduate at the college, and I do believe that peaceful reunification is, our greatest hope for the Korean Peninsula, but I have to confess that I don't really understand what incentives North Korea has for a peaceful reunification. So I was just wondering what the South Korean and U.S. views were on how realistic that is, and if so, how far in the future that would be.
Pastor Park?
Well, we have only ceasefire agreement, which was signed in 1953. That is the only mechanism that exists now. I'm sure you are from South Korea. Well, from Seoul to DMZ is, I think, rather similar to from the Boston to Worcester, only 30 miles away, where more than 1 million heavily equipped soldiers are confronting 24 hours a day. And now, North Koreans' deployment of artillery alongside of DMZ is the formidable one, not to mention about biochemical weapons and their airplanes or fighters whatsoever. Now, do we need to go with North Koreans like this? This is a real shame for us. Somebody called the North Koreans enemy, but I do not accept that North Koreans as enemy, our brothers. And we need to have confidence building measures between us. We should trust North Koreans should trust us. So this confidence building is the foremost important subject, and reducing tension is another one. So before we bring about our reunification, we have to start from small things, socio-economic aspect. For example, that we have around 10 million people who came from the North Korea, leaving their families, their mother, father, and brothers and sisters. They do not know where they are about. And they are so anxious to send letters to their family members. My brother-in-law is one of them. He has written more than thousands of letters, piled of letters. He doesn't know where to send. So this is the way we have to start now. Before, in doing so, I think we can start to have the future planning for the reunification, the gradual way of our reunification. That's really not only from the southern part, but also from the northern part. If I add one more element, it's related to the gentleman's the question as well. We are extremely sorry to see that particularly the children in the northern parts are suffering from food shortage. Sorry about that. But we do need transparency that when we offer our rice or our foodstuff to be delivered to the needy people, particularly to the children, not to be diversified to military use, because they keep the fourth largest military strength in the world now, even though they are suffering from food shortage and economic difficulty, they keep that. So our brothers and sisters should get together, should talk for our future, the peace. That is the name of the game.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Yes, my name is Sang-Woo Huang from Mahoney Hawks and Goldings, and it kind of pertains to what your conclusion was just said. I would like to apologize for writing this down, but I tend to get nervous before a large audience. Okay, I would like to address this question to both our distinguished ambassadors. If you had one or two things to say to the second generation Koreans, such as I myself, what would you advise us to do in terms of participating in this growth and the future growth of these two countries, economically and politically?
You go ahead, you're in office.
You mean between South and North? Or United States?
Between the relationship between the U.S. and Korea.
Oh, I see. I was confused, yes. Well, I don't know whether you were born in the United States or you...
No, sir.
Well, many of Korean Americans came to the United States, particularly that for the veterans for their next generation. And their wish and their hope was that I want my boys and girls to send Harvard and MIT. It was their dream and their hope. And I really take pride whenever I visit the Ivy Leagues or some other state universities, wherever I go, that the first greeting from the president and the professors are, "Congratulations, Ambassador Park. The Korean American students are so wonderful. They are all, most of them are so honor students." So that whenever I heard that, it's really source of my pride as ambassador to the United States. So I am very much looking forward to your contribution, not only for the United States, but also Korean-United States, United States-Korean relationship, which, as I mentioned in my speech, that we want to be the greatest partner of the United States and most loyal friend of the United States. In so doing, we will have a better future and will contribute more to the international organization or international society. So I am great expectation to youngsters like you for your contribution.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ambassador Laney.
Well, I would just say that my great concern in U.S.-Korean relations is the lack of understanding on the part of most Americans about Korea today. Even people who are in business are not as well informed about the current state of Korea and its economy and the powerhouse that it is. That's why we're emphasizing it here tonight, because that's a very important factor in our relationship. This is no longer a client state, it's not a problem state. This is a real partner and ally, and it's going to become more important as the years go on into the next century. And I have great confidence that the Korean Americans who are studying this country and are living here can help broaden the understanding of the rest of the American citizens about the importance and role of Korea. The image of Korea is not what it should be. Part of it is the past, the war, and all that sort of thing. We need to work on that. You know, when you would talk about the importance economically, people are astonished. They just don't appreciate how important Korea really is to the United States. And part of the problem, frankly, we have in Washington is getting it on the radar scope is that, you know, Bosnia and the Middle East and parts of Africa and other places get a lot of attention, or China. And we have a hard time. And we've got enormous equities involved in Korea. And we can't really get it there. Now, I'm expressing now as I'm out of office some frustration on this point. And you're the ones that are going to have to help do that. It isn't just us.
Thank you.
Ma'am, I think you're next.
Thank you. My name is Kate Thompson. I'm from the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy. Ambassador Laney, in your comments earlier, you mentioned that China might be able to use its influence to bring North Korea to the tables, the four-party talks. And I was wondering, in your view, why would it be in China's interest to do that? Why might it not be in China's interest to do that? And what carrots and sticks might they have to bring that about?
Well, the premise of that comment is this, that China, I don't think, and I think many people agree with it, does not really want to see North Korea collapse for many reasons. The most unacceptable one from our standpoint is they may not want to see a unified Korea. It may be in China's interest to keep it divided and have a buffer between a robust economy of the South and China. But in terms of geopolitics, I think they don't want to see it collapse because they see enormous problems flowing immediately from that situation. Refugees, chaos, possible military action, all of which would in some way or another impinge upon China. So I think it's clearly in their interest that North Korea be placed in a position where it can be helped to the point where it not only will barely survive, but can become a vis-a-vis that can lower tension and eventually go through some of the transitions that China itself has. I would suggest that part of our need is to get more business into North Korea. Business has worked in China in a remarkable way to help ameliorate the situation, whether it's human rights or other things. It's not all over, but it's working. And North Korea, I think, would welcome business. But as you know, many of you know, the United States still has an embargo on any investment in North Korea or any participation by business in North Korea because North Korea is still listed under the terrorist state. And of course, South Korea is the same way. So in a way, we preclude those agents of change that would be most effective, namely private enterprise, which would be the yeast that would, I think, have a powerful influence over time in the way in which the North would have to change. I would like to take the risk and see that happen and see the North Koreans experience firsthand what it would be like to have an effective economic unit operating there that did something. I think that would win more converts than all of the propaganda in the world.
We have time for one last question, please.
Thank you. Rob Warren from the Korea Economic Institute. I was going to ask the question the lady from Fletcher School asked, so I'll supplement it and ask Ambassador Park another question. Ambassador Laney, you had more than 16 years of distinguished experience in leading a major university in the United States, and then the Clinton administration sent you off to Seoul. Would you reflect for the JFK School what it's like to move from academia to public affairs in a high-pressure, tense job? And what experience do you bring back from that experience? I hear you now as an advocate of policy. Now you're free to speak your will. And how do you reflect on that experience? And Ambassador Park, following up on the comment by the woman who just asked the question, Ambassador Laney, what is your thought about engaging China more deeply in this peace process? Thank you.
Well, I'm not sure if I were going to look forward to being an ambassador, I would choose being university president as the best way to move there. My interest in Korea, I didn't want to be an ambassador just to be an ambassador. The only country I had any interest in was Korea because of past association. So in a way, it was an evolution of that past experience before I had anything to do with the university presidency. I think it was probably for my wife more of the problem than for me because she said, I've done that 17 years, now I got to do it 3.5 more years, all that entertainment and the receptions and the dinners and everything. But the issue of weighing, judging, and assessing and deciding, I think, have a lot in common. And you know, you're always dealing with the larger picture and trying to see how you can solve something rather than simply abrade it. We're very good at abrading things, and also how you can move beyond a zero-sum game. I guess this is the thing that over and over again to me has impressed me in international relations, how still we're caught in that very deadly equation of the zero-sum game, where people, the leaders and all, want to be vindicated, and they're willing to risk an awful lot of their own people's welfare in order to prove something. I think nations to have to prove something is, boy, a recipe for disaster. And so one of the things that I've seen in the Korean Peninsula is really the need to get away from somebody winning and somebody losing, especially when one side's already won, and try to look at it in a very coolly rational way, to interpret national interest in that larger sense. Something, I don't need to lecture you all on that, but anyway, I've had a fascinating time. I've thoroughly enjoyed it.
Ambassador Park.
It's only 6 years since Seoul had normalized our relationship with Beijing. So we are apt to forget the previous relations between Pyongyang and Beijing, which was that staunchest allies between two countries. During the Korean War, more than 2 million Chinese soldiers came to the Korean Peninsula and fought, I would say, against us, against South Koreans and against the United States. And since then, their influence and their cooperation or coordination never diminished until Seoul had normalized our relationship in 1992. And also, Beijing was the signatory of the Armistice Agreement, and also as the immediate neighborhood of the Korean Peninsula. The lady asked that with regard to the Chinese, yes. Being an immediate neighbor, we feel strongly that how the Chinese participation in the four-party talk is essential. And well, after the normalization between Seoul and Beijing, their relationship, though existing, is rather, it seems like reversed, favoring Seoul-Beijing relationship. It doesn't necessarily mean that Chinese doesn't have any interest or any stake in northern part of Korean Peninsula. I think though it's low profile, their interest is still alive very acutely, and it's a very lively one. And for the lasting peace on the Korean Peninsula, that is why the United States and Korea asked China to join the four-party talks. This is a very essential one, we would say. Thank you.
This evening, we have heard the phrase, good partner, loyal friend, and great expectations as characterizing the U.S.-Korean relationship. I hope you will join me in thanking our two distinguished guests, the ambassadors who have taught us much this evening, Ambassador Park and Ambassador Laney. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Time flew by.
Well,
So